Welcome to Military.com's end of the year review for the year 2014. Here you'll find our picks for the top stories of the year. You can find all these news stories as well as the latest military headlines at Military.com. President Obama surprised many when he forced Defense Secretary Chuck Hagel out following the midterm elections. The commander-in-chief then had a problem finding a replacement, as many favorites for the job removed their names from contention. Eventually, former Deputy Defense Secretary Ashton rose to the top of the list and was nominated on December 5th. He must now face what's expected to be a challenging confirmation process before he can officially take over for Hagel. In August this year, the U.S. Army introduced the Operational Camouflage pattern to replace the much-maligned Universal Camouflage pattern. Many soldiers' first reaction was that OCP looked exactly like the multicam pattern worn by soldiers and airmen in Afghanistan. The Army's announcement followed delays and hand-wringing over the best pattern, especially once Congress ordered the services to stop producing service-specific camouflage patterns. Militants with the Islamic State in Iraq and Syria stormed through northern Iraq as Iraqi soldiers put down their weapons and retreated. ISIS gained the attention of the American public after publicly beheading U.S. journalist James Foley. To help the Iraqis push back the advancing ISIS fighters and protect the Kurdish military, the U.S. started launching airstrikes on August 8th. The U.S. and coalition forces have since flown about 1,000 missions in Iraq and Syria, targeting ISIS formations and vehicles. Pro-Russian militants first started moving into Crimea, a pro-Russian territory in Ukraine, in February. Throughout the year, Russian military involvement in and around Russia has escalated, causing tensions to rise with the U.S. and other European allies. Thousands of Russian troops remain on Ukraine's eastern border, and Russian military equipment continues to flow to the pro-Russian militants inside Ukraine's borders. Army Sergeant Bowe Bergdahl was released in March by the Taliban after being held prisoner for 5 years. He was released in exchange for the release of 5 Taliban militants who were held at Guantanamo Bay. His release received scrutiny inside and outside the military after members of his former unit said he deliberately left his post. The Army recently finished an investigation into his capture. Leaders across the U.S. military are investigating the best ways to incorporate women into combat positions traditionally held exclusively by men. The Pentagon has said each service must provide an assessment on whether women can hold these combat and special operations roles by 2016. The Army will allow women to complete the Ranger training course next year as part of their assessment. Air Force leaders announced in January that the service had discovered an elaborate cheating scandal in their nuclear missile officer corps. 92 officers were initially suspended, 9 officers were later fired. The wing commander at Malmstrom Air Force Base, where the cheating was discovered, resigned in March. U.S. military leaders in each service are continuing to try and reduce the prevalence of sexual assault occurring within the ranks. Multiple high-ranking officials have faced sexual assault cases, including Brigadier General Jeffrey A. Sinclair, who later agreed to a plea deal that had the sexual assault charges dropped. The Pentagon released a sexual assault survey in December that found more assaults had been reported. Military leaders say this increase in reports is a good sign. VA Secretary Eric Shinseki resigned in May after it was discovered that multiple VA administrators had deliberately manipulated patient appointment schedules that left veterans without proper medical care. Former P&G CEO Robert McDonald has since been hired and has worked to fix the ills of the VA system and redeem its reputation. Air Force officials have faced a roadblock on Capitol Hill in their plans to retire the A-10 Thunderbolt. Air Force generals say the service can no longer afford the close air support aircraft, especially aircraft that provide niche missions. Congress has pushed back, saying the A-10 remains relevant. Their argument was brought to the forefront as the U.S. redeployed A-10s to Iraq to fly missions against ISIS. The Joint Strike Fighter program achieved a significant milestone on November 3rd when an F-35C performed the first arrested landing aboard an aircraft carrier. The Navy's JSF variant completed the first landing on the USS Nimitz off the coast of San Diego, California. The landing was a bit of good news for the most expensive weapons program in U.S. history that has experienced countless delays and cost overruns. The U.S. and NATO combat mission in Afghanistan will end on January 1, 2015. President Obama plans to keep about 9,800 U.S. troops in Afghanistan for train and assist missions. There were a number of debates on how many troops to leave, especially as the Afghan government executed a transfer of power. The U.S. has had as many as 100,000 troops in Afghanistan. President Obama bestowed the nation's highest award for valor, the Medal of Honor, to 24 veterans who had previously been passed over because of their race, according to a government investigation. In March, Obama presented the medals in a White House ceremony to veterans across World War II, the Korean War, and the Vietnam War. Robert O'Neill sat down with Fox News and announced that he was the U.S. Navy SEAL who killed Osama bin Laden. He has received a mix of adulation and anger, as some say he should have kept details of the classified operation to himself. The Army is shrinking its force in light of the budget cuts forced upon the service as part of sequestration. Army leaders have planned to draw down the force to 490,000 soldiers. These cuts come as the U.S. is again launching strikes in Iraq, and more soldiers are going to Europe in light of Russian aggression. The military has a budget problem. Too much of its annual budget, some say, is eaten up by personnel costs. The White House and Pentagon have pushed this year to drop troop pay and benefits. Congress has pushed back, but in the recently announced defense budget for 2015, troops will see a lower pay raise and a lower housing allowance.